I want to ask Gnostic a few questions. If Mr. Gnostic Informant, um, I've heard a lot of good things about you. I have a buddy who's buds with you, and I was wondering, were you ever Christian?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for a long time.
And what snapped you out of it? What kind of Christian were you?
So I grew up Catholic, but I was never into it. And then I wound up in prison when I was in my I got charged when I was in my late 18, 19. And then went to prison when I was 20 for violating probation. Uh, all just, drug charges, nothing crazy, nothing like anything weird or anything violent or anything. But I was in prison and read the whole Bible cover to cover, was going to the services that were in there, became a Baptist when I got out because I had a friend that was going to a Baptist church and went to one of those. It was a Zionist Baptist church, one of those like way out there, like MAGA type of shit, right? And was there for like 7 years, from like 2011 till like 2018. What got me out of it though was my willingness to actually dig into ancient sources and study my way out of it. So I started to like obsess over like early Christianity, the Gnostics, the heretics, uh different different denominations, the Valentinians, Sethians, Carpocratians, Basilidians, uh Simonians, all these early first century, early second century groups that were floating around that the church fathers were writing about these people, but we didn't have their text. We just had what they said about them. And I was like obsessed with, well, what if they were right?
Were they
But
negative
ended,
writings? Sorry to interrupt. Were
yeah,
they negative writings?
yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. There were just like every one of them was basically just like, there's even Epiphanius got to the point where he was saying like they were like eating babies and stuff. Like it's just complete like nonsensical uh things they're saying. Maybe some of it's true. I don't know. The point is, eventually, as I'm reading about these other Christians, I started to learn about Pythagoreans, Platonists, and Stoics. These were different. These were philosophical groups in the Roman Empire that were around in Greece and Athens and Ephesus and whatnot. And these writings were being influenced by these people. So it wasn't just the Old Testament they were drawing from. They were drawing from Plato, Pythagoras, straight the Stoic writers, stuff like that. So then I started going into those texts and started reading what those guys are saying. And then it opened me up and I realized I've been told a lie about what paganism is. Paganism, I've always been told, was this other religion that was like completely barbaric. They were like, sacrificing goats at the altar and, you know, doing all types of orgies. And that's what I thought paganism was. Bacchanalias every day. But when I read the Pythagoreans and Plato, and I'm reading Aristotle and all these other writers that the church themselves are drawing from, the church, the Thomist, Aristotelian, and like um, theosis comes from this Pythagorean doctrine called apotheosis, and I'm learning about all this stuff. And I realized that I'm going through the knockoff. This is the knockoff brand. Why am I rocking knockoffs when I can go to the real Nike brand, which is the local traditions of the Eleusinians and the Samothracians and the Cabirian mysteries and the Phrygian mysteries, the real on the ground actual religions of the time period and the philosophers.
What time
And
period
so
is
that's what
this? Because I all these names you just threw out there, I've never even heard of. This is
I
like
know most people
wild
don't.
stuff.
The
Okay.
time period the time period would be from between the Iron Age from Homer, from which would be 8th century BC, all the way up until the Christian takeover, 4th century. And between that's a long time, I know. So that's what I just say, the 1200 years we have the whole history of things going on between Rome and Greece and even Persia and Egypt, Ptolemies, the Seleucids, the Attalid dynasty in Phrygia. the Romans, the whatever. And I'm then I started reading about these people, and then I'm seeing, wait a minute, they're not these barbaric, cannibalistic, orgy having psychopathic pagans that I'm told in church. They're actually the ones that brought the philosophy, the ones that brought marriage, the ones that brought piety and virtue and ancestral customs and burying your ancestors in a tomb, and then you'll be in the same in the same tomb as your ancestors going back 1,000 years. And like imagine that. Imagine being part of a family line where you are important. You know who does that? Jerusalem. I visited Jerusalem a few years ago, and every single Jewish person takes their bones and they bury them on a mountain that faces Jerusalem. They're doing ancient pagan rites for Jerusalem. Christianity is basically saying, let's continue ancestral customs for Jerusalem. Let's forget about Athens, forget about Gaul, or forget about Germany, forget about Scandinavia. You know, those rights. Who cares? Let's carry the torch for this Middle Eastern city. And that's when I started going, holy shit. Why are we doing this as a society? Why are we basically cutting off and castrating ourselves spiritually and just going and just carrying the torch for some other city we have nothing to do with? And that's kind of what woke me up.
And did you have like a feeling of were you angry at all? Were you relieved? What was your feeling after
Yeah.
kind of realizing that? Did you have the stages of grief? What was it like?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it's like it's even right now, I still can't believe that we're sitting here and everyone we talk to that we're talking to right now is on the internet right now. All of us have internet connection. So there's no excuse. Like we all can be looking up. I don't know if you ever heard of Loeb, LOEB.com. It's like $100 I think $100 a year. I forgot how much I pay. But like that, if you get a subscription to Loeb, you have thousands of ancient sources you can read, translations of them with the original Greek and Latin if you want to read those too. Everybody here has access to read about our ancestors, about other religions, about other philosophies. You can read Aristotle, you can read Plato, and it's like, and then you like someone like Philo, for example, who's a Jewish Alexandrian Greek writer from the first century. What is and you would think you read him and he's gonna talk about how great Abraham is and how great Moses is and how great, but really when you read him, he's talking about Plato and Aristotle. He's talking about the Greeks, how great they are. Even they thought this. And so it's like, so yeah, at first I was angry. First I'm shocked because I'm like, there's no way I'm the only one figuring this out. But like actually a lot of people figured this out. James Frazer figured this out in the early 1900s. James Frazer wrote The Golden Bough, and he realized that Christianity was just basically a Judaizing of the ancient dying and rising motif. So it's basically taking an ancient pagan motif that we find in the myths of Adonis, Dionysus, and uh, and Attis and whatnot, and it's basically Jesus is basically a Judaized version of this in the New Testament. And James Frazer's Golden Bough. Everyone should read that. Um, there's another book called Ritual to Romance. An English writer. He basically ties into this stuff. But then all of a sudden, scholarship. It's like people are wondering, well, how did you get to this conclusion before anyone else? It's actually I'm way late to the game. Scholars and the 1800s, Nietzsche knew this too. Nietzsche's big on this. Late 1800s, early 1900s, they were already there. They were already on the cusp of like completely opening this thing up, and they were. And then all of a sudden, something happened right around 1948, right around 1948, 1950. All of a sudden, something happened, and all of a sudden, magically, academia as a whole turned its back on the James Frazer and the Nietzschean type of mindset, and
Weird.
all
What
of a
happened
sudden,
around that time?
Right. Let's think about that, right? But
Hmm.
let me but just to tell you what happened, what the conclusion ended up being, all of a sudden, you no longer were allowed to think Jesus is a myth, and you no longer were allowed to think the Old Testament wasn't historical. But for a century, scholars were already on that road going, okay, the Old Testament, there's no history for it. Like we have no evidence for anyone named Abraham. We have no evidence for anyone named Moses. We don't have any evidence for anyone named Noah. The Greeks don't mention these people. The Egyptians don't mention these people. The Hittites don't mention these people. The Babylonians don't mention these people. The Assyrians don't mention any of these names from the Torah. The only evidence we have is for the kings, like Hezekiah and David and whatever. Okay, fine. And then on top of that, scholars in that period were going, I don't even know if Jesus existed. He might have existed, but the gospels are mostly drawing from all these motifs that we find all over the Mediterranean. And then all of a sudden, after 1950, scholarship just out of nowhere, just turn its back on this type of mindset. And all of a sudden there was two pillars, even to this day you'll find in academia, that Jesus is a historical person who lived and got crucified. And two, the Old Testament is actually very old and very historical, very reliable. And for some reason, if you doubt those things, you'll get kicked out of academia. Or you might not get kicked out of academia, but you will get a lot of pushback. You will get a lot of
You'll be
there will be a lot of
facing
pressure. Yeah, yeah,
headwinds.
yeah. And so what happened around that time? Well, I think we all know what happened around that time. And the reason why is because it became a national it became a topic of national emergency.
Wait, I don't
Like,
know what happened around that time.
The creation of the state of Israel,
yep, it just
1947.
and it
Oh,
just happens to it just happens to coincide right around that time where there was a huge shift in academia towards historicizing the Bible and pushing Old Testament narratives as historical. And it's like people noticed it, and it's still a thing right now. Even right now, Yale and Yale Divinity School, Harvard Divinity School, all these big institutions, they still have these axioms that Jesus definitely was this guy, this definitely walking around doing all this. He's a sage. Maybe they don't admit he did miracles. They might be skeptical of those things, but he definitely was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and also the Old Testament definitely historically reliable. And the reason why is because if people are taught that those things are true, you'll be more likely to support what's going on over there.
wow. Real quick, Big Tech. I think we should put the invite out to Gnostic for you know what.
What for the question for the Bible
No,
question for what?
no, for Tuesday.
Oh
I think
yeah,
that
that'd be awesome.
All right.
yeah,
On
yeah.
Tuesday we have a special show happening. Do you know who Kurt Doolittle is? We have him as a special guest on Tuesdays. So we're trying to put together like a super panel.
No, who's that? Oh, yeah, I think I might know who it is. I might know who it is.
He has the Natural Law Institute. He puts
Okay,
on
okay.
seminars and has a website. He's working on. He has a big project he's been working on for a long time. But he's like real deep in. His angle is coming at the Abrahamic method of deception. Really, is what he calls it. But he's
Hate
like,
to have it.
yeah, he's identified really like he's systematized like a system of measuring, and like in kind of like categorizing. Well, basically the Abrahamic strategy. He
It's a
sees their
think
culture
tank.
as having
Yeah,
it developed a very particular type of strategy in operating in the world, not just in politics and stuff, but actually all the way back to the ancient world. It's in
yeah,
the religion, it's in their culture, it's in the way that they move and operate and get things done. So anyway,
yeah. No, that's interesting.
Be great if
Yeah,
you
I
could
yeah,
be
noticed.
here.
I'll definitely join.
great.
And but yeah, when you bring up James Frazier, that is like he's like the Satan of biblical scholarship in this day and age. When you talk about him, people go, "No, he's wrong." And it's but what I'm actually pretty hopeful of and pretty optimistic of is more and more academics are coming out in the last couple years. I would say 5 to 10 years that are actually going, wait a minute, Fraser is actually right. His everything Fraser's saying is actually defend it. You can defend it with the source material and the primary sources and the archaeology. And there was this idea that if you even said the word dying and rising God, you were a quack, that they didn't exist. And it didn't matter how many primary sources you pull up. I can pull up sources of Osiris dying and resurrecting, Dionysus dying and resurrecting, Attis dying and resurrecting. People don't even know. There was a Roman festival called the Hilaria. It was instituted by Claudius Caesar in the 1st century. So 40s AD, he was emperor before the Gospels. And what happened in this festival? It happened during the month of March 22nd. They would have a little Lent period. They didn't call it Lent, but it was a little period of where you would give up certain foods for
No
like a
way.
9-day period. And then on March 22nd, there was a day of mourning where they would take a dead or a fake idol of the god Attis, and they would take out a pine tree, and the tree carriers would come, and they would take the tree and they would stitch the god on the tree like a crucifixion, and they would bury him in the ground. And then they would mourn for 3 days, exactly 3 days, ritual mourning in the city of Rome. They also did it in Egypt for Osiris too. It's called the Hilaria. On the 3rd day, on March 25th, which, by the way, if you look up churches March 25th, that's the day of the Annunciation for Jesus.
Whoa.
Yeah, March 25th, the day of rejoicing. And the priest, there's one source. It's a Christian source out of all sources that tells us this. Firmicus Maternus. He says that the priest would say, our God has been saved, and through his suffering we are saved too. And everyone would rejoice, and that was called the day of rejoicing. That was Attis. But then there's also myths of dying and rising Adonis, dying and rising Ishtar, dying and rising Tumutsi. There's all these different motifs of gods that die and come back to life. You can show them all this evidence, and they're trained. A lot of these Bible schools are trained to reject the idea of a dying and rising God. For some reason, it's just like it's a bad word in academia. But luckily, in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been more and more PhDs coming out and writing peer-reviewed articles and books saying, wait a minute, this is actually this is actually backed up by the primary sources. The dying and rising God concept is a real thing. And not only is it a real thing, a lot of these motifs seem to be in the New Testament as well.
I tried to look up lobe.com, L-O-B-E, you said?
L-O-E-B.
Yeah.
L-O-E-B.
L-O-E.
That is the digital library, lobeclassics.com. I'm sorry, it's L-O-E-B classics.com. And that is the digital library where you can find everything. You can read anything you want to read. You can read anything from Anaximander to Plato to Herodotus to Aristotle and all the Latin poets like Martial and Ovid and Virgil. And you can just dig into those sources, and you're just going to find what's so crazy about Loeb. This is what's so interesting about Loeb. You notice it starts off with sources going back to Homer. So it goes back to 700 BC. And then you start seeing in 600 BC and 500 BC and 400 BC and so forth, there's thousands of texts that our ancestors gave us, thousands. And all of a sudden, right around 400, 500 AD, all of a sudden, Loeb drops off to zero. There's no more sources. There's no more classics. You have Beowulf, and you have the what is it called? The Knights at the Round Table.
Arthur.
You have the King Arthur legends. There's a few classics in the Middle Ages, but there's like, compared to the classical period, the pagan world, it's like one out of 100. All of a sudden, after the Christians take over, there's no more plays, there's no more myths, there's no more legends, there's nothing. They stop writing. Art dies,
Damn.
everything dies. It's complete dark ages. And it's like from 500 AD to 1000 AD, you can barely find anything that compares to the classical period of Homer and Plato and Aristotle and Ovid and Virgil and Herodotus and Strabo and whatever. Like, the point is, like, when you start looking through Loeb, you're gonna notice something. You're gonna notice, how come the farther back I go, the more advanced their writing gets. It's like the weirdest thing ever.
They were brilliant.
Asyric's got his hand up. I'm sure he's been itching to say something. This is kind of his little bread and butter. What do you got, Asyric?
Yeah, no, big fan, I have to admit. But I did want to ask you a question because I know that you're very well read and you've talked to a lot of scholars. I'm just going to go over a timeline and you tell me whether you agree with this timeline or not, right? It'd be 392, right? Paganism is outlawed. In 415, so this is 23 years after, right? You have the infamous murder of Hypatia.
Right.
529, the Platonic academies closed permanently. That's 137 years after paganism was outlawed. And, folks were being hunted down. If you've read some of the incidents that happened in Egypt, I forget exactly where this occurred, but they would the pagans would go into the temple to protect it, and the Christians would burn it down with everyone inside.
They would tear down the statues and burn it down.
Yeah.
The way you see, like when you see like leftists going down and tearing down statues of old Civil War, whatever. That's the way they were doing. That's how they viewed it back then.
Yeah, for sure.
The Christians were the leftists of antiquity.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with that. The communists too, taking it out of Acts, share everything in common type of thing. But what I was trying to point out was that you see this discrepancy in time. 137 years and the Platonic academies were still around. You have Augustine writing, there are none in his work, The City of God Against the Pagans. He writes inside of it that there are none closer to us Christians than are the Platonists.
Right.
Was there a Platonic Christian alliance against paganism?
So it's not really an alliance. The Platonists themselves, if you read like Plotinus and Iamblichus and Porphyry, they didn't like the Christians at all. They couldn't stand them. The Christians, though, were borrowing so much from the Platonists as far as their philosophy and their metaphysics goes. The idea of a triad, for example, the Trinity comes from the Platonic triad. That's this idea that God comes in three forms. He's corporal, incorporeal, and spiritual. Corporal meaning like physical nature, representing in nature. Incorporeal meaning spiritual, or meaning mind in our concepts and in what we think about. And then spiritual is like the intermediary. So that's where the Trinity is like mapping that onto Jesus and God the Father. Anyways, the Christians are drawing so much from the Platonists that they have to admit this. Like they can't deny this. This is what Justin Martyr talks about this. As you mentioned, Augustine talks about this. Even when Western Christianity, Thomas Aquinas talks about how much he's indebted to Aristotle. So they're drawing from the philosophers like you have writers that are actually, I just shared a post recently of Christopher Amitolini, a Christian from Byzantium, who was writing hymns basically praying to Christ to save Plato and Plutarch. And it's because they're so indebted to them, as a lot of their metaphysics, a lot of their philosophy, they're borrowing from the Stoics. A lot of those Christians have very Stoic attitudes and stuff like that. And so they're indebted to them. But as far as an alliance goes, if you actually read the Platonists, if you read what they say, there's nothing, you don't get anything like indebtedness to the Christians or Jews. You get the opposite. You get total pushback. You get total Porphyry writes against the Christians, literally writes against the Christians. Even Plotinus was throwing a few jabs at them, and they left. They ended up getting kicked out of Constantinople and going to Babylon because they couldn't deal with it anymore. But yeah, I guess that answer your question?
I mean, yeah, certainly. There was definitely some Platonists who were on the Christian side, and in fact, a lot of Christians were Platonists themselves, like
Like Dionysius,
Origen, Dionysius. Yeah, Dionysius in particular. He was appointed to be a bishop, and one of his conditions was that he remain a Platonic philosopher, and the Christians were totally cool with that.
Yeah.
Justin
Martyr tried to be a Platonist first. He was going through the academy, and then he wrote down in one of his books that there was too much math, too much geometry, and he just that the Christian worldview was so much simpler and easier. So he became a Christian. So like you could see there people are trying to do both. You can be a Christian and a Platonist. Again, Platonism can map onto Christianity. It's just not every Platonist is going to be because to be a Christian, you're adopting ancestral customs that is Judaism.
Right.
So you can't be both. Like you can be a Christian and a Platonist, but if you're going to be a Christian, if you're going to be a traditional Platonist following the Muse, then you're on a whole different. You can't be a Christian anymore. You have to kind of pick which one of those.
I would love to have a discussion with you on this because here's one other thing to consider. Because I don't know if you've looked at the Zoroastrian connections with Christianity. I'm sure you have.
Yeah.
But you have one god, Ahura Mazda. It's the end of days because they have a final judgment, a final resurrection, and so on. We definitely
and the concept of an evil one. The concept of the evil one. That is a Zoroastrian idea. So
now,
so Satan in the Old Testament is not really diametrically opposed to Yahweh. You find him in Job talking to him like he's one of his servants. Hey, what's going on, God? Hey, Satan, what are you doing? I'm just hanging out. Oh, what do you think about my boy Job? Then you get in the New Testament, you get in the writings of Paul, you get in the general Revelation. All of a sudden, he's called the evil one, literally. Hand him over to the evil one. That's a diametrically opposed figure, like you find in Angra Manu, which is in Zoroastrianism. That's a Magus tradition right there.
Right, and you probably know that there's three main schools of Zoroastrianism, right? You had Gathic monotheism, monism, essentially, and then you have a hard dualist position. Then you have kind of like the Zervanists. You know what I'm talking about. So and I look at its earlier iteration, the Gathic monism, monotheism, and I can't help but to notice the parallels between that and Plato's doctrines.
Right.
Specifically, like Ahura Mazda emanates the heptad, the one emanates the henads, right? And it's the good, it's the one, from all things flow,
right,
and stuff like that. And so, what I'm wondering, and this is kind of a long prelude to a question, but it's the last one. Is there a hard connection, in your personal opinion, that Plato's theory of the forms and everything surrounding that is just a copy paste of Persian Zoroastrianism?
I wouldn't call it a copy paste. I would say that he's definitely he says this in his own writings that he's he's indebted to Persian, Babylonian, and Egyptian philosophies that Pythagoras was taught by Egypt, Babylon, and he says Zoroaster, or no, I'm sorry, Aristotle says that Zoroaster heavily influenced the pre-Socratics and stuff like that, which would influence Plato. But but Plato definitely is developing his own ideas into this through Parmenides and Heraclitus and his teachers, Pythagoras, the Orphics, and another thing too, the Platonist monism is not the same as monotheism that you find in like Judaism, for example. Because I do think Judaism is trying to adopt Platonist metaphysics in their religion, but where they mess it up, where they corrupt it actually, is they don't understand monism. Monism doesn't
say they try to make the archangels and stuff like that like emanation beings.
Monism doesn't say there's only one God and we should only focus on that one God. Monism is saying there's one perfect there's a one perfect creator, demiurgic figure who's perfect, unknowable, unnameable, and he's above all the cosmos. You can't even get to him. Don't even worry about him. But underneath that one, you have the gods. You have Olympus. You have Zeus. You have Athena. You have Aphrodite. And those are the terrestrial gods that we interact with. So polytheism isn't really polytheism that people think. Polytheism is just there are intermediary spirits and terrestrial gods that are controlling the terrestrial world that we're a part of. Above them is the one. And so the Jews in Alexandria or in Jerusalem are trying to follow that model because it's so popular and dominating all philosophy and everywhere. But they end up taking it to a different level where Yahweh becomes the one, which is impossible because their own scriptures say that Yahweh is jealous and that he needs you to do these things and he wants you to do this, he wants this, that. That means he's not perfect. If God wants anything, then he's not perfect. So the Platonists are laughing at Judeo-Christians in the corner and going, okay, we get it. You're trying to follow us. It's cute, but they don't get it. That's kind of what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think this is conversation that could continue another day. But one last follow up, which is on your interview with Giorgiani.
Yeah.
You both you and him mentioned a source saying that Plato, like Magi attended Plato's funeral, said that Plato was a part of their order. Where is that source exactly?
That's from Aristotle or somewhere. You're talking about Giorgiani mentioned that, right?
It was you and Giorgiani, but I didn't catch the source, like exactly where.
That might be either in Aristotle. Off the top of my head, I can find it for you. I'll send it to you. Off the top of my head, it's either from either somewhere in Aristotle or it might be in Diogenes Laertius. Diogenes Laertius is a writer who does all the history of the philosophers, and I think that might be where it's from. But it is somewhere. I do remember seeing it. Giorgiani mentioned that to me, and then I remember finding it later. But I can send it to you later.
Very cool, man. And by the way, keep up the great work, man. You're killing it.
Thanks, man.
We got a lot of hands. All right, Octavius, you got something to say? Then we'll get to me and Gene.
Absolutely. Been following you for about 3 years now, and I brought forward to HT here a long time ago about the old Amon Hillman story and the babe or the boy getting arrested in the park. And I know that you and Amon, I think, have had a falling out, but
yeah. It's all good.
Yeah, to say the least, right? Yeah. But the biggest thing I found that was crazy that you had come across was if you can explain it again, is the Star Spangled Banner.
Oh yeah.
That is absolutely blows my mind.
Yeah, I told this to Danny Jones. By the way, Danny Jones was on Joe Rogan today. He called me up. He's like, I'm going on Joe Rogan right now, bro. I was like, what? He goes, just remind me what you told me about the Star Spangled Banner again. I was like, all right.
Hell yeah.
I told him, so maybe hopefully he gets on there. But here's the story. So there was this old English song, and it was an ode to a Greek Anacreon. There's an old ancient Greek poet named Anacreon. And he was this poet. He was a Bacchant worshiper. He loved to drink. He loved to party. And there is a song. So this English poet writes this song called Anacreontic Song. And the lyrics of the song are very pagan and very Luciferian. You got the horned god playing with his flute, like Pan is playing the flute like the devil, right? And then you got Apollo, the light bringer, Lucifer. You got Dionysus, you got Aphrodite, who also is literally called Lucifer in Latin, Venus. And it's just a really beautiful pagan song. Now, if you play the ballad, the music that you sing the song over to, it's the Star Spangled Banner song. And in fact, if you look up the Star Spangled Banner, that was written by Francis Key Scott, and I think
Francis Scott Key.
Francis Scott Key, and I think it was 1800. I think it was after 1776. Not, I think it was like, I'm on the top of my head, I can't remember. Someone could probably look it up. Let me just do it real quick. Star Spangled Banner. It is written in 1812. Yeah. So it's not right. So 1776 is way after that, but not way after that. But you get Star Spangled Banner gets written. But what Francis Scott Key did, he took that exact song, the same exact song that's pagan and Bacchic, and has the horned demon with the flute and all that, and all he did was write new lyrics to it and read that's our Star Spangled Banner. The American anthem is based on a song that is pagan. How beautiful is that? And that's why I love this country, because behind this whole Christian facade, you have people like Age of Reason. What's his name? Who wrote Age of Reason? I drank a little bit of wine. That's why I'm like forgetting things. Age of Reason.
The founding father, Thomas Paine.
Yeah,
Common sense.
you got
Common sense.
Yeah. You got Thomas Paine, you got Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and you read those people. Read what they said. They are not Christian founding fathers. They are not. So like, they set this up for us. It's our job to follow what they laid down. Read Thomas Paine. Find out about the Star Spangled Banner. That's what I'm trying to tell people.
Where's the influence, though? Where's that influence? Where did that Christian influence? Who crept that in? If it wasn't the founding fathers, who put that? Who injected that?
The Christian you talking about?
Yeah, the Christianity.
Because they had a population of thousands of people who were stuck in Christian mode, and there's nothing they can do. Imagine trying to raise a rebellion against the English if you were a pagan. They're all going to turn on you. They can't. They were crypto pagans. They could not admit what their true desires were. They had to lead the Christians to get the Christians to follow them. They gave them, okay, go to whatever your church you want. We're not going to tell you you're Anglican. We're not going to tell you you're Orthodox. You can just follow whatever you're growing up in, whatever. But the point of it was, this is the first country on record to get out of some sort of state religion, some sort of Anglican state or whatever. France followed us, actually. French Revolution was after us, and they were the second one to do it. And now the entire world has followed suit. We're secular. But the point was, they were trying to go back to the democratic ideals of Rome and Greece. So, and that's not to say we don't need an aristocracy. I'm not saying everyone needs to vote. I'm just saying this ideals that we find in Greece and Rome. That's what they're trying to set up, which we're here now, and we need to fix that. That's our job to sweep this all up and fix it.
You quoted Thomas Jefferson in one of your best quotes. I heard you. I think you really liked it when you talked about the fledgling. The Protestant was the biggest enemy of a true Greek democracy that we have, or we're gonna have. I think you and Amon talked about it.
Yeah.
That was do you think that the actual Jewish Masonic influence on our founding fathers was heavy?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
George Washington was a Freemason.
Right.
I'm not saying that you should be a Freemason or anything, but like, it was I guess I can say it was for some people, it was a step in the direction out of whatever state, Anglican, whatever it was. I could see why someone like George Washington would be attracted to that for a lot of reasons. But yeah, there was in that period, in that 18th century, we're talking about, I mean, we're leading up to the time of Nietzsche, right after that. But like,
Yeah.
Thomas Paine, for example, Thomas Paine was a big influence on Nietzsche. People were starting to think freely finally, and oh my God, read Age of Reason. Like, he rips through the Bible page by page, just like, for the first time ever, you finally see a writer taking this thing for what it is and actually like going through it. Yeah. But yeah,
I
that's
appreciate it, Neil. Thanks for everything you do, man. Stick with it, and
yeah, man. But I
truly,
think, but to go back to what HT said, there was no way around the fact that the masses were all Christian. There's just nothing you can do. You can't tell them. You can't just be 100% real in that situation. They kind of had to play their cards a certain way. Does that make sense?
yeah,
Yeah, it does. I'm
yeah.
just I'm wondering, you big brain guy, Devin Stack's another big brain guy that I kind of, I respect quite a bit. And, there's he kind of made a video that people are kind of spreading, pushing it over my way. Cause, I've been pushing that we need to like address this Christian question and we need to hit it hard. Um, we need to evaluate everything right now as a race, like an inventory. And he kind of made the argument of that this is never going to go away. Christianity is never going to go away, and it's kind of retarded to fight against it. Do you think that it's necessary in order for us to, I guess, defeat our enemy or get anything going that we can that we need to address this, or can we just throw like a band-aid on it and move forward? What are your honest thoughts?
No, it needs to be addressed. It needs to be. I think it's the biggest existential crisis of our time of like who we are. What like I watch and I don't know about you guys, but like when I see a white supremacist Christian, it reminds me of the Dave Chappelle skit where there's the black guy who's a KKK member. Like I don't get it. Like you look
Wow.
like yeah, it's such a because
It is like that.
Christianity at its core is international, multicultural, globalist at its core. It's look at the Catholic Church. They're going to China, they're going to Egypt, they're going to Africa and Sudan and the Congo, and they're trying to set up churches everywhere, and they want everyone to convert. This is not an ancestral custom. This is not a local tradition. This is not something. This is a global. This is the real globalist is the church, is the Christian is Christianity, you know. And so, if we want an identity, if people want to have an identity, people want some sort of identity and mean something and have some sort of meaning in their own lives. Well, then that's the first thing they should be looking at. I think is the Christianity. It took away everyone's identity for 1,000 plus 1,500 years. We've lost their identity where you can go back to ancient Rome and you can go to Athens and they were a part of the Eleusinian tradition. Or you can go to Phrygia and they're a part of the Phrygian mysteries, or you could go to the island of Samothrace and they had the Samothracian mysteries, and you can go to Egypt and they had all this all the Egyptian mysteries, and you go to anywhere you went, they had their local traditions. Go to Germany and the Nordic Norse pagans and the Gaul. You had the Druid pagans. Everywhere you went, you found a local ancient tradition, and that was a world that was colorful and three-dimensional. And now we have a world that's just flat and 2D and completely it's lost all of its air, you know?
Thanks for answering that. Mean Gene, I know you've been patient. Go ahead.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks first of all, Gnostic, for being here. This is great, man. You popped into this little corner of the internet, and I really do hope you can come hang out. I think it's next Tuesday, as Big Tech was talking about, with Kurt Doolittle coming in. That would be awesome too. You're like an encyclopedia. What you mentioned earlier was kind of fascinating, though, and I wasn't aware of this academic consensus that had been in place around the 40s to help in, the institution of Israel. And I was just curious as to what other, from like a non-academic, like maybe on our slightly softer minds out here, looking at just what's going on in the culture, what else may have been, could you recognize from that time period that may have been culturally enforced to prohibit that knowledge that we were on the path to gaining from the 19th century when it kind of stopped there in the 1940s and 50s? Did you see a lot of that reinforced? Like I'm thinking I did, from as simple things as television and movies and theater and whatnot to kind of prohibit thought in that direction, like being culturally enforced. If you follow me.
Yeah. No, I think you could see a shift happening after World War II, where there was a lot more focus on, like, in scholarship, like, just talking about biblical scholarship for a second. There was a total takeover in the academic world of the Fraserian type of model, James Fraser and people who thought like James Fraser. There's a few other scholars that I could mention, but like anyways, where there was this idea where people were actually taking Christianity to task and opening it up and being very critical of it, and then taking the Old Testament, ripping it apart, and taking out like what is historical and what is not. What are we left with? And then saying, wait a minute, this might even be Hellenistic. It might even be written in the 200s BC, not 1500 BC like we've always thought. Stuff like that. Archaeology coming up with nothing, no evidence for the Torah. And then all of a sudden there was like this shift where all of a sudden there was like this pushback against that mindset where people like Fraser were getting pushed aside as no good, and people just saying, oh, the model doesn't fit our model. We have a new model now, or the new model is uh you know and here what happened actually, I forgot to say this. It went from a bunch of polymaths. I don't know if you know what polymath is. A polymath is someone who studies multiple things. They study math, they study geometry, history, they study philosophy, and they become educated in the big picture. And that was what James Fraser was. That's what Nietzsche was. That's what Carl Jung was. That was those early 1900 scholars, late 1800 scholars. They learned everything. They were trained in all different areas of study, and that's how they got the big picture. And then all of a sudden, after 1950, academia started doing this specialization thing where now, even right now in 2025, if you just go to college, you go to get a PhD, you will be pushed off into a little tiny corner somewhere. You will become specialized in one little thing. And you want to study the ancient world? Well, guess what? We want you to study ancient chalices, silver chalices, not even gold, just silver chalices. And you will be an expert. You will be Dr. Mean Green, specialized in silver chalices from the 10th century. And all you know is 10th century silver chalices.
Yeah, it's a
You don't
great
know anything
point.
about,
Yep. I know
you don't know
exactly.
anything about 9th century or 7th century or 10th. And what happens is everyone becomes siphoned off into these little specialization corners, and no one can see the big picture. No, everybody's looking at the trees and not the forest. That's what I've noticed as what's going on even right now. All these academics that I'm talking to, they're all specialized in one little tiny thing. One person studies one Dead Sea Scroll. Other person studies Roman religion of the 200s AD. This person studies ancient Greek religion from 100 to 200 AD. And they're all just in these little tiny siphoned off areas. And I don't know if that's divide and conquer tactics or what, but I've noticed when you read these big dogs from the 1800s and early 1900s, they understood everything. James Fraser can talk. When I read James Fraser, he knew about all types of history: Slavic history, German history, Egyptian history, Persian history, and all the different religions from all those places. He was all in one place. James Fraser knew about all this stuff. He also knew different languages. James Fraser was translating Greek, Coptic, Latin, all these different languages. And today, most of these scholars might know one language. They might have one special language they know. And that's the difference between now and then. Is back then you had polymaths, and now you have specialists. That's the difference.
Yeah, no